Midway USA brand product designers have one straightforward goal: develop high-quality, technically sound products and deliver them to customers at reasonable prices. If you are immersed in the shooting sports industry and pay close attention to every single detail, you know our products are built right and stand up to everyday use. Who has shooting mats and range bag systems to hunting clothing and just about everything for the outdoors? Log on and shop 24/7 with super fast shipping. MidwayUSA.com.
If you hunt enough, you learn the truth. What you seek speaks a language and knows it well. That's why every Primo's call for everything you hunt is made the right way. We sweat every detail so you get more out of every hunt, and nothing leaves our hand until we know it'll work in yours. Because we don't just make the world's best calls, we speak the language. Primos.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. On this 288th episode of the podcast, we're talking about using fish. I don't mean using fish to grow more corn or even using fish in a really good recipe, although I would encourage you to do both if regulations and tastes permit. Today I'm talking about using certain fish in your pursuit of other fish. And so I guess it's worth saying I'm not talking about using bait either. Again, nothing wrong with that. But I'll just lay out the situation and the scenario, and that'll explain it better than anything else. For a lot of trout anglers, and I would say the majority of my audience is trout anglers, we have certain pictures and ideas and situations in mind when we think about fly fishing. And so in my mind, it is that large glassy pool with a big trout rising out in the middle of it. And so when I think of my skills, I think of trying to make a cast and achieve a presentation and maintain a drift that is going to best put my fly in front of that fish and convince it to consume it. All right, so that's what I want. Now, there aren't a lot of ways to practice that except for doing it. I mean, that's just the nature of it. I mean, you can practice casting, you can practice maybe your drift, but you really can't practice setting the hook, and you can't practice setting the hook at distance. You can't practice mending really even that well without that fish being in front of you. And you don't really want to be practicing while you're trying to catch the fish. But that is why I'm talking about what I'm talking about today, about using fish. Now, this is not to denigrate the upstanding fish species like the fallfish and the bluegill. I think both of these fish are great. I've had plenty of days where I've spent inordinate amount of time and focus and energy and sweat chasing fish that would be otherwise considered beneath the trout angler. But I am relatively species agnostic when it comes to chasing fish. That said, they're usually more prevalent, easier to find, and probably more willing to play ball than trout. So I'm advocating, and I've written about this before, I've talked about this in part, I'm advocating that you use these fish, one, for the fun of fishing for them, two, for the benefit of actually improving your skills and honing your craft so that when you do get into that situation where you are having to make that 60-foot cast to that rising trout and then make those mends and then make that hook set, that you're not doing it from scratch. Now, there's a very good chance you'll succeed, but there's a much better chance you'll succeed if your muscle memory is where it's supposed to be. So we'll use that example to start. So, you know that bluegill will rise to Catskill style dries, right? They'll eat that because they'll eat pretty much anything, especially if you're not chasing the largest bluegill out in the pond. That's a completely different story. The biggest bluegill are going to be a lot more discriminating and are going to require a little bit more finesse and different techniques than chasing just any old, 6 to 8 inch bluegill. But of course, an 8 inch bluegill on a 5 weight is nothing to stiff at, especially if you're in moving water. If you are in a situation, if you're in a part of this country where you have panfish in moving water, consider yourself blessed. That is a wonderful species to pursue. I think that times out down in the mid-Atlantic on big rivers like the Shenandoah and Potomac in particular, some of those big, broad-breasted panfish, once they get into the current, I mean, the 6 weight was doubled over with some of these larger fish. So all that to say, it's not only fun from an angling perspective, but it's a wonderful proving ground for your skills. So you're going to have to make some choices here. And that is, all right, I'm going to work on this particular skill. Instead of being on this big river and putting on a big streamer and chasing after smallmouth bass, or maybe probing the shorelines for carp or something like that, you're going to say, I'm going to pretend I'm fishing for trout, put on a small dry fly, make that long cast, and then when that panfish comes up and smacks it, I'm going to work on setting the hook. One of my probably worst fishing memories from like a performance standpoint was a repetitive missing of trout on the West Branch of the Delaware. I remember the pool and the situation very distinctly. Actually, I have two situations like this. One was in the West Branch of the Delaware, and I kept missing fish as they rose. It was just really, really far out, and I was either setting the hook way too early or way too late. I just couldn't get it dialed in. I had to end up wading super duper close into really deep water to kind of get a better feel. So that's one situation. The other one was on a unnamed tributary to a river up in the Rocky Mountain National Park, and it was a really decent sized creek. But because of the angle I was at, I just could not hook these trout. These cutthroat were coming up and nailing my fly, and the only ones I would hook were the ones that hooked themselves. I was just really struggling, and so it's not a given that you're going to be able to set the hook on a dry fly take, especially if it's at distance or at a weird angle. And so I would say use a situation where there's panfish to your advantage and work on that. Work on those long casts. Work on mending that line. Work on making that hook set. And then you're probably even going to get the auxiliary benefit of learning how to maintain tension on that fish as you're fighting it across varied currents at distance. That is one of the situations that I have found myself in where I've lost fish, is where you catch a fish and you catch it in a pool, but there's a couple of currents between you and that fish. And that fish may be going on a few runs, and then it gets into the water and it takes off upstream and immediately throws some slack into your line, or comes downstream towards you and throws slack into your line. And so you want to work out those kinks on something like a 6-inch bluegill and not on a 16-inch brown trout. So that is something that is worth doing. And maybe you're going fishing for smallmouth bass and you're going to spend 8 hours of your 9-hour trip doing that. For that hour, say, you know what, let me work on this. Let me see how this goes. And at the end of the day, you're catching fish on the surface. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. But give it a genuine trout presentation. Don't skip that thing along or skate it or pop it or anything like that. Give it a nice, good dead drift. And honestly, too, just even the presentation aspect of it is going to be beneficial as you think about where you're going to be making that cast, where you're going to be putting that fly, why you're fishing in one spot over another to entice fish. So that's the first way you can use fish to train for fish. And the same thing is true for fall fish too. Sometimes you can be really frustrated. You see something rising, you think, there's trout in here. That's amazing, and you realize, oh, those are fall fish. Okay, that's fine. Take it for what it is. Take it for the opportunity that is. And honestly, for my money, I've said this before. I'll say it again. A 10-inch fall fish is going to fight harder than a 10-inch trout under most circumstances, especially small streams. Maybe not in a big river, but in small streams. I'd take a fall fish for the fight over a trout most days. All right, so that's the first one. If that last statement didn't make you stop at the first one. The second one is, if you are learning to nymph, then panfish, fallfish, even suckers are going to provide you with a great opportunity to hone a couple of skills. One of which is being tight line nymphing, or nymphing without an indicator. And so they're two very different things. So, we think of tightline nymphing, and there's a lot of ways to do it. Euro nymphing is its own, ball of wax. But you can certainly do tightline nymphing techniques with your traditional gear, your 9'5" weight, wherever it may be. But then also just normal nymphing without an indicator. You don't need to cast a hare's ear 30 feet away from you with an indicator. It's possible to fish using a bunch of other techniques. And although this is not a nymph-specific how-to podcast, I mean, really what it comes down to, for our purposes today, is there's things that you can pay attention to. You can pay attention to your line-to-leader transition. You can pay attention to where your line submerges. You can pay attention to feel even, and that's going to be much more of a factor in a tight line presentation, but you can certainly pay attention to how things feel, the feeling of ticking of the fly on the bottom and that stopping or that changing, even at a longer cast without the benefit of an indicator. Using indicators are great, and I'm not knocking them at all. I actually just got some that look like little bobbers. So I'll have to bring that back here at the end of the podcast. But you can use this on panfish and fallfish and suckers and all other things. Once more, these fish are going to eat that size 16 beadhead hare's ear. They're going to eat that copper john. And if you find moving water where you're going to be able to nymph, then by all means, bust out these tactics and techniques for these other fish species. And in doing so, then you're going to be able to work on your skills, work on your cast, work on your presentation, and then, of course, work on feeling that fly to get taken. So you might say, well, of course, a bluegill is going to violently strike that thing, but that's not always the case. If you ever watch the way that panfish, whether it be a bass or whether it be a crappie or whether it be a bluegill, the way that they take these flies in or take food in, they pull a bunch of water in through their gills, and then they spit that thing out almost as quickly. If you've ever watched late night outdoor channel infomercials, you see them doing this, and they, the baits they're touting that the fish want to hang on to are the ones that they don't shoot back out of their mouth real fast, but they have that ability with the way that they take in water and then propel water out of their mouths to take something in and then just as quickly take it out and use that water to their advantage to get rid of things that they don't want in their mouth. Because again, fish don't have hands. They got fins, but they don't use those fins to feel. They use their mouth to feel. And if something doesn't feel like it ought to be in there, they get rid of it as soon as they can. And your artificial fly is probably going to elicit that response. All that to say is that still is something that you are able to feel. And it may be a violent strike, but it could very well be a quick take and release by that panfish or by whatever other fish you're fishing for. And you're able to begin to detect that sensation so that you can learn how to make those hook sets. Again, a very quick analogy is jigging for crappie. Jigging for crappie on a larger lake or in a pond that has crappie on it, using very lightweight lines, very lightweight rods, and they have these light paper mouths where you're feeling for just the tiniest change in maybe the sensation of that jig head dropping into the water, or as you bob it up, you feel just a change in the way that the tension on your line to your rod tip is, and that's when you make that delicate hook set. Same thing is true when you are fishing for these other fish, these fish you can use in streams. You can train yourself for the nymphing tactic of your choosing. So definitely would suggest that. So first we have long dry fly presentations as well as hook sets and fighting fish that are hooked far away from you. Secondly, we have nymphing tactics and applying those techniques and skills to other species. And thirdly and lastly, for today's purposes, I'll talk about fishing wet flies. And when I say fishing wet flies, I include not just traditional wet flies, but also fishing streamers on a swing in this manner. And honestly, I haven't done a whole lot of two-handed fishing, but whether you're using one-handed tactics or two-handed tactics, then both of those can be employed to catch any fish that's out there. But of course, one of the issues with fishing a wet fly on a swing or a streamer on a swing is that you have to maintain some sort of control on that fly's drift, on its swing, and on its retrieve. And that, again, if you are eliciting very, very violent strikes, then this is not so much of an issue. But for a lot of the fish that are going to be taking that on the drift, on the swing, and then also as you work on your ability to retrieve line, it's great to have a willing sparring partner in something like a little largemouth bass or something like that in a stream. So that way, when you get out on the trout river, which is probably where you intended to employ these skills, then you are able to quickly make that transition and you don't have a drop off of where you are missing fish. So that's one that I have actually relatively recently used is giving some of those skills a shot as you're becoming more familiar with the gear. If you are making a switch maybe from single-handed casting to double-handed casting, and then what that means to start to maintain the line. How often do you catch fish when you don't have the right kind of tension, when your rod's not in the right position, and all that sort of stuff? It's remarkable how frequently that occurs. But the more that you practice, the more time you put into it, the more ready that you'll be to have your rod hand, your rod tip, your line hand, and the slack in your line managed so that you are able to take care of anything that happens at the end of your line. So, by all means, if you live in a situation in a place where you have all the trout in the world, then spend your time figuring this out in front of trout, in front of steelhead, in front of salmon, whatever it is. But if you are like most people, and where you live, the fish that is much more prevalent is something that other people might turn up their nose at, then I would say go for it. Give it a shot, and it's a lot of fun. And who knows what you're going to catch anytime you're fishing. That's one of the great things about warm water fishing. That kind of distinguishes it from cold water fishing. It's not too often where I go trout fishing and I catch something weird. But when you are warm water fishing, you catch weird stuff. And that's part of the excitement. That's part of the enjoyment. That's part of really what might make you turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to go back and fish for those fish just to fish for them. I think that was a significant point in my fly fishing journey as a young man, where I became this like real dedicated trout angler, and I certainly still am. But it was when I was using my trout gear on my local bluegill and bass ponds to learn to cast better, learn to strip flies in better, just learn how to fly fish better. And I started catching those fish again that I had been catching with conventional gear, but now with fly gear. It made me say, you know what, this is almost as fun, and in some ways it's more fun. And that made me, appreciate the multifaceted nature of fly fishing and how you can pursue those warm water species. You can pursue trout as well. And honestly, bluegill on a popper, there's just not a whole lot that's better than that. But bluegill on a dry fly, like we talked about before, that's pretty stinking great too. So, do you have anything like that? Do you have any ways that you use fish or use on the water situations and circumstances and scenarios to prepare for either a particular thing you're doing or something that you are trying to improve on? If so, do let me know. Matthew@castingacross.com. And along those same lines, we are only a few episodes away from the next Accusations podcast. Got a couple of really good emails lately, but we always take any email up until the last minute of recording at the every 10 episodes with any feedback or requests or questions or, hey, even an accusation. This week on the podcast, 2 articles. Now, these 2 are really good, so I'm totally fine with a shorter podcast and sending you over to castingacross.com, to the website, to check out this stuff. The first article is called Wrongs of Nature. Is this land your land? Now, I will call out one of the conservation organizations that I mentioned in this article. I think that they quickly read the title and they assumed I was on their side, so they liked a bunch of social media stuff and they backed off real quick and they deleted all of it. But Wrongs of Nature is addressing the rights of nature movement. And I talked about this a long time ago on the podcast. I don't know how long ago, but it was there's 2 things that happened. First, there was a liberal seminary, and by I mean liberal seminary, I mean a seminary that takes a very, very loose view of Orthodox Christianity, where they had a service where the staff or priests or whatever they were having people apologize to plants for how they've treated plants. Now, can you abuse creation? Absolutely. But can you apologize to a plant? Absolutely not. The second thing was the beginning of this rights of nature movement as it relates to granting the same rights that are granted to humans and to corporations to natural features, and then giving them basically spokespeople. So this article, though, Wrongs of Nature, is a look at this movement and look how it is really going to be self-defeating, which is on display with the kind of case study I bring up in Boulder Creek in Nederland, Colorado. It's outside of Boulder. I think I've probably been around it, but I can't remember distinctly. But because the protections were this right of nature, this personage that was given to a creek, to a watershed, it was very, very easy. At least it seems like it's going to be very easy for the town to reverse course and put a dam on it. So a lot of good that did. Uh, and I'm not a fan of dams, but it very much seems like the track that was taken didn't help out anybody at all. If anything, it's just a confused attempt at elevating and glorifying something natural, but trying to do it by assigning the same value and dignity that is assigned to people. And anytime you do that, what you're doing is you're playing with reality. You are not dealing honestly. You're not living by truth. And so consequently, the issue with that is it's going to be self-defeating. It may feel good. It may elicit a lot of likes and thumbs up and hearts on social media. But at the end of the day, it's not true. And so it's not going to have lasting value. The way the world works is that as things get shaken, those things that are false, those things that are lies, are going to fall away. And so, although I truly appreciate the fact that there's people that are doing these things that are doing so because of their concern for nature, my encouragement to them would be to do it the right way, not come up with something, not feel like things are so desperate that you need to have cloak and dagger epistemology, for a lack of a better phrase, to do stuff. So I would say check that out. Obviously, it's something that I'm passionate about because I care about conservation, but I also really care about truth. And so this is what I write about a bit in Wrongs of Nature. Wednesday's article, totally changing the kind of pace and the theme of what we're talking about. It's called Honing the Craft, Tied in the Catskills. Now, I have written about frequent flyers fly fishing. They're a YouTube page, and of course, they have other things on social media. I've written about 3 of their films, I believe. And this most recent one is about fly tying in the Catskills. And I just absolutely love the way these guys are going about making fly fishing films. It's not extreme. It's not product placement. I mean, they are sponsored by Trout Routes, but that's not like they don't talk to these fly tyers and say like, and so how do you enjoy using Trout Routes? Yes, that's not what's in there. It's just great conversations with people who are not seeking to be in the spotlight, but it's just real authentic, legitimate, real good fly fishing content. I mean, it's 20 minutes well worth your time. So go to the website, Honing the Craft, Tied in the Catskills, and you can find out more about this film and go ahead and watch it, even over on castingacross.com. This week's recommendation on the podcast is the Oros strike indicators. Now, what's special about these? I will be upfront. What drew me to them is that they look like red and white bobbers, right? I have got a bag full of different kinds of strike indicators, and each one of them really works very well, but I'm on the hunt for the perfect strike indicator. My favorite strike indicators, really up until I started using Oro strike indicators, is essentially the same style. It has a screw-on bubble style of strike indicator that allows for easy changes. But what I like about Oros is not just the phenomenal aesthetics of the red and white bobber, which I love and I certainly embrace, but the fact that there is no crimping. I would take that back. There's minimal crimping on your line. And especially if you're using lighter leaders, which you're not always using when nymphing, but when you get down to 5X, I don't want anything being compromised in there. And so I like how they attach with the soft foam surface. But then also, they are very streamlined. So your leader material goes through the center of the product, but without having to thread it. So really, it's not something that I want to explain. I want you to check it out. I'm going to put a link to their website, but from what I found on a very brief inspection is that the red and white ones I bought them at Orvis, so I'll just put it that way. But I'll put a link to Orvis Fly Fishing's website, and then you can check out how it works there. And then if you want the red and white ones, go to Orvis, go somewhere else. But I definitely encourage you to check them out, especially if you are not happy with like stick-on indicators or yarn indicators or things like that, or if you don't like the way that some of the bubble style indicators attach. Definitely check these out. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast on iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
A life that has the stories to back it. A life to be proud of. It's a Winchester life.
Yeah, baby. 6'8" Western. Oh, mule deer, baby, right there.
Tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.